So you'd like to become a real estate investor, but you haven't quite figured out the property management side of finding good tenants. This week on the Saskatchewan Real Estate Podcast, Saskatoon Realtor and property manager Aaron Wright joins us on the key to finding good tenants. Hope you enjoy.
This is the Saskatchewan Real Estate Podcast, the show that highlights Saskatchewan real estate. Looking to buy your first house, your next investment property? Subscribe to never miss an episode. Here's your host, Ron Caroni.
Hello and welcome back to the Saskatchewan Real Estate Podcast, your home for all things Saskatchewan, all things real estate. If you're looking for more content just like this, make sure to like this video and subscribe to never miss a future episode. Lots of people, when they're getting into real estate investing, there's this huge focus on securing the right property, making sure it cash flows. But there's another side to it. Once you own the property, we have to find some good renters. And here to help me explain this today is a guy who's been on before, popular last guest, Aaron Wright, Saskatoon Realtor. Before we get into today's topic, Aaron, just give us a brief background of yourself as a realtor and a property manager.
Thanks, Ron. Happy to be back. Appreciate the welcome back there. So I'm a realtor with Royal LePage Varsity in Saskatoon. I've been a realtor for just shy of 3 years now on the sales part of things. Prior to that, I was with Elite Property Management for 5 years. So I've been doing property management for about 8 years now in and around Saskatoon.
Wonderful. And so right now in Saskatoon, even just anecdotally, I know this from trying to rent out a condo, there is extreme demand for rental housing in this city right now. And what I'd really love to do with this conversation with you here, Aaron, is for these new investors and maybe even for some seasoned pros out there, just to get some tips and tricks out there of how to land these great tenants who are ultimately going to take great care of the property and make it a seamless investor journey for those folks. So, let's just start it off. We have a really hot rental market. There's a lot of demand. How are we finding the correct tenants for your property?
So that's a great question, Ron. And I answered a bit differently for everyone because, as you said, some are very fresh, new investors who buy properties and some are seasoned veterans. So what's a good tenant to one person may not be a good tenant to another person. So really qualifying and figuring out what you want, what your long-term plan with the property is. I have investors that I work with, they actually buy and hold properties for 5 to 10 years. And then they know the plan is to sell it in 5 to 10 years. And I have people that buy and sell properties and their plan is to hold it for 30 to 40 years. So depending on that type of position that you're in will depend on the type of tenant you want. Obviously, the goal is always to have someone that treats it like their own home, is always clean and tidy, always cutting the lawn. You can show up at any time. They're happy to welcome you in and all that. But, a good tenant to one person is different than a good tenant to the other, because also, some people may be willing to sacrifice good tenant as in, someone that pays a little bit more rent. That's good for one person. And the other person will say, no, I'll take a little bit less rent if you treat the property well. So, yeah.
Taking the difference between those two, Aaron, that like long-term time frame of holding on to the property versus maybe a shorter time frame, what are we looking at for the differences in what we might say tenant? Does it come down to the amount of rent you might charge someone, the profile of the tenant? Kind of walk us through that.
Yeah, so typically you can actually get a little bit more rent if you're looking for that shorter term tenant, like someone who just willing to sign a 1-year lease, right? In and out. They might be, a really good qualified, like young entrepreneur, business owner, or just out of university. They're 25 to 30 years old. This is a stepping stone for them. They're going to be here 1, maybe 2 years. They're willing to pay, $2,000 a month instead of really fighting for those $1,500 a month properties. But they know they're only going to be here for a couple of years. They're going to buy their own house, and this is just a stepping stone for them. So those may be good tenants because they're reasonably motivated. They're not actually at home a lot. They're working a lot. They're starting their careers, getting their feet off the ground. They're also a bit younger, so maybe they're more involved with activities away from the home, that kind of stuff. And usually willing to pay a little bit more rent because, they take what they can get rather than, being in the competition with the long-term renter who says, hey, I'll rent this place for 10 years and, give me a little bit of a discount. So
right. There's not that forward looking to say, I plan on moving on from Saskatoon or even this property in the medium to short term. I'm looking for a place to kick my feet up. You be the landlord, I be the renter. You take care of your business. I'll pay the rent on time.
exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
100%.
So I've secured the property, Aaron. You and I have done the mortgage and the bought in the house for the person, and now they're ready to rent this property. What are some of the first steps that they're going to take to find tenants to take in this place? And I guess let's start with where are you marketing these units now?
Yes, so that's a good question. So advertising is a big part of how you get good quality qualified tenants. Now, that being said, right now, back in the day when I first started property management 8 years ago, everything was Kijiji. Kijiji, put it on Kijiji, all that stuff. It was just everything was found on Kijiji. You'd find cars, you'd find rental properties, all that. Now it's actually shifted a lot. It's still online, but Facebook Marketplace seems to be the most biggest and consistent, and it's actually way better quality control because typically you can quote unquote creep someone on Facebook when view their profile, have a look, and kind of qualify them a little bit too, and decide if you even want to message that person back or not. I posted one on Facebook Marketplace just 2 weeks ago, and I actually had 93 messages in 24 hours. It was a half duplex, 3 bedroom, 1,800 a month, your standard Saskatoon property, and yeah, 93 messages in 24 hours. It was absolutely bonkers, and I'm a pretty busy guy, and I don't have time to respond to 93. The first 20 or so I was responding, and then I just got out of control. I was like, you know what, I can't do this. And it turned out that 5 of those people had common friends. So the best thing to do actually right now, with it being so hot, and a hot market's different than a slow market. The best thing you do right now with it being so hot is just share it with your friends, share it with your family. Chances are someone or someone has someone looking for a property, and if they're kind of a 2 arm length reach from you, well, then there's a bit of accountability. If I'm going to rent to you, Ron, or let's say Ron, I'm going to rent to your friend Joe. Well, Joe knows Ron, who knows Aaron, and Joe wants to get the property, so says, hey Ron, talk to Aaron, help me get this one. And then Joe's not going to mess it up and be bad on the property because it'll make his buddy Ron look like a jerk if, God forbid, he punches holes in the wall.
There's a little bit more of accountability as opposed to a complete stranger. There is a little bit of, hey, I know this person, and even you might even find someone who'd say, Aaron, I'll vouch for this guy. This guy's a solid person. You'll have no issue renting to them.
Yeah, exactly. And I actually just had that with one of my own personal rentals that I have. Another realtor friend of mine was selling one of their clients' houses, and they reached out to me and then put in a good word. And I really trust the guy. He's a well-known realtor, Dustin Sickler, there in the city, and great guy. And he said, yeah, you should rent to this girl. And I did. And it's worked out great so far.
Dustin, also a past podcast guest on the Saskatchewan.
Yeah, great guy.
So just to round that up, Aaron, you would say that maybe dead is a strong word, but more and more people are finding their rentals on Facebook Marketplace as opposed to Kijiji. And this is actually a benefit to people who are looking to rent out these units, because you can do a little bit of a background check. And even from the sense of, this unit is not going to be rented with dogs. And if that person says, I don't have dogs, but then all of their pictures on social media are 2 big Rottweilers, well, there's a pretty good chance that those dogs are one day going to find their way into the unit. So a really good way to kind of check out future tenants from that side.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I wanted to quickly, while we're on this, because this is kind of what I found, and you kind of mentioned it there, you get those 93 messages, Aaron. How does a person realistically sort through them? Or do you have any strategies for handling the onboarding or the interview process of all of these tenants who are desperately looking for a place to live?
Yeah, so I've actually come up with a strategy recently in the last year. Much like real estate, sales, people run open houses. I actually started running rental open houses because, there's just not enough time in a day for me to make 93 appointments with 93 people. So I just post and say, hey, Saturday from noon to 2, I'm going to be at 123 Main Street. Come have a look if you're interested. And then that also filters out, because half the people who message me, is this available? Hey, I'm interested. If they don't come during the open house, they've already automatically eliminated themselves because they're not making this a priority. So if it's not a priority to them, well, it's not a priority to me, right? So doing stuff like that and this rental open house idea really is, I find, the best strategy, because I still have then about 15 to 20 people that show up. And then of those 15 to 20, maybe 10 of them will fill out an application when they're there. And then, it really narrows down the search to, hey, I've got 10. And then probably of those 10, there's really 2 or 3 that I've got checked on that I want to call the references. I want to start verifying. And I kind of have 5 pillars that I check on myself. So
let's get into that application a little bit, because I think this can be an important factor and maybe a step that a lot of people don't take, but then it ends up burning them later on. So walk us through what's in this application and what are those 5 things that you're looking for that's going to allow not only for you to have a good investor tenant experience, but also a good experience for them. If you're putting someone in a property that they can afford, it's also going to cause a lot of stress.
Yes, absolutely. So the first and foremost thing I do is I check their identification. If someone is not willing to share their driver's license or some kind of photo ID with you to say who they are and say, hey, I'm Aaron Wright, here's my driver's license to prove that I'm Aaron Wright, well, then they're not someone I want in one of the rentals that I manage or in one of my own personal rentals. They're just, there's got to be, hey, and people are like, why do you want my ID? And I turn around and say, here's my ID as a property manager. If you want to know who I am, this is who I am. So that's the first and foremost, is making sure you're verifying exactly who it is. Because back in the day when I worked at Elite Property Management, there were times we didn't take identification, and it gets to a point where you have a bad tenant, you have to kick them out, you take them to rentalsman, and Joe wasn't really Joe was actually Bob. And
right,
good luck get to the sheriff, get to the role of having to get the sheriff there to kick out Joe, and Joe's not there, and he's like, no, I'm Bob, I'm a squatter, and becomes a whole can of mixed nuts there. So
so a very simple that at the very beginning, you're eliminating a lot of potential future stress by doing a simple thing at the very start.
Absolutely. So ID is the first thing. The second thing is I want to get a work reference, some kind of employment verification. And with that comes a third step, which is income verification. So if they're not willing to tell me their income verification and employment verification, and if you don't work, that's okay. I rent to lots of people who are on the SET program or disability or whatever the case might be. Well, then give me your caseworker reference and still verification of income and how you're getting money every month in order to pay the rent. Because there are properties that,
are you going to afford this monthly rent? Your mom and dad, you have tuition, scholarships.
Exactly. And if it is a student, they can get a letter from a guidance counselor or, academic advisor to say, hey, they're in school, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of 2 and 3 together is, work or school or whatever kind of verification, and get a reference, because you're calling that person, and usually that person, whether it be an academic advisor, manager at work, they're going to be honest with you. If they're like, yeah, the person shows up late every day, I don't know if he'll be here much longer. They're usually very, very honest with you. And that leads me to the fourth thing to do is check with a past landlord. And that one I say take with a grain of salt, because the work reference or, character reference, if they're in school, whatever, they're way more important than the past landlord reference. Because a past landlord reference, you do want to check with them. Half the time they'll be honest, but I have had it where some past landlords lie to you and say, hey, they're a great tenant. When they're really a bad tenant, they're just trying to get rid of them.
Right. So they would love for them to move out of their property into yours. So they're doing anything they can to say, oh, yes, this person's wonderful. Please take them right away.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of the fourth. And, the top 3 steps are really important. The fourth one is, it's good to do just for verification, but, make your own judgment. And then the last thing is just do a gut check. That's why it's huge to have those open houses or, some kind of personalized appointment if you want to go that route instead of the open house. Because you get to meet the person, you'll get to see kind of what kind of car they drive, what kind of clothes they wear. If you say you're going to meet them at 2:00 and they show up at 2:15, that kind of stuff, right? That's different than if you say you're going to be there at 2:00, they show up at 1:50. Well, hey, they're interested. They really want this, they want to make a good impression. So that kind of gut check is huge as well. So
wonderful. Yeah, trust your instincts on that side. In this really tight market, Aaron, so if you go to Facebook Marketplace, and anyone at home can do this, whether you're listening or watching this on YouTube, simply go to Facebook Marketplace and there is a map option. And you can look at like a broad spec view of like all the rents available in the area. And I kind of lead into this because when you're trying to price out what you should be looking at your property for, Aaron, there are not a lot of comparables available. And so as you have a property that maybe you have a tenant moving out, or maybe this is your first time entering into the market, how should you price your unit? And could you give us some tips and strategies on this really hot market that, like, do you make a mistake by saying, oh, the closest one is 2,500, I'll rent for 3,000, or just walk us through kind of like how you might price out a rental in this market?
Yeah, so that's where I strongly recommend a professional property manager, because those kind of things are important. Or, have a good real estate agent or real estate advisor of some sort who knows what they're doing and has some kind of rental experience. It's really tough because, some people right now may price stuff higher because the market is hot. But also, if you want a long-term tenant, you don't want to price it like a jerk and, have the turnover every year, So, really kind of finding people who can pull historical data, and usually you need a professional to be able to do that, who's been around the industry for a while. And yeah, really, it's tough to answer that one without, I have tools in my back end that I have access to that not everyone would have access to. You kind of said the most common thing, hey, go to the Facebook Marketplace, go to the map. That is honestly for like the first time or person who's just kind of one-off renting. That's the best thing to do. The other thing you can do is obviously, again, ask your friends and family, hey, are you renting right now? Oh yeah, my rent is $1,500 a month. Yeah, my rent's $1,600. Okay, well, if you have everyone in and around Saskatoon paying about $1,600 a month, well, chances are you should be in and around that ballpark as well. If you want
the highest, you want the lowest,
Yeah, exactly. So that kind of thing. And I'm always available if people do have questions right now with what's kind of neighborhood rents going for, they can always reach out to me and I'm happy to give a little bit of advice. So
it is kind of a tough thing because there's going to be specific neighborhoods and different properties that folks are looking at. And depending on those little differences, it could make the difference of $300 or $400 in rent. And so it's such a fascinating time, especially as we're in a raising rent environment. It does become tricky of what could a person expect. And at least anecdotally, what I'm seeing, I did a video about this a couple of weeks ago, is that you're also starting to see a lot of investors offload properties back onto the market. Now, I'm assuming this is happening because mortgages are coming up for renewal. We're also at a high point, and it's just time for people to say, hey, I'm going to pull my money out and wait. And so the person who's buying that property now, what should they be charging in rent, and what's fair? And it's a tricky question. So I think, you gave a good answer there. You really need to, talk it out with your circle and with the professionals that
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, obviously you typically wanted to at least cover the mortgage amount. So that's a good starting point. Definitely see what the mortgage is and get it to at least cover your expenses, and kind of go from there. But yeah, like I have so many people that reach out and I say, hey, well, I've got a half duplex in Avalon area. And I'm going to use that as an example because that's the one I just rented out for 1,800. Our unit, our focus is long-term tenant. We actually just got someone who's probably going to be there for 10 to 20 years. Great person. And, but the unit's been totally redone. Whereas some people are charging 1,800 for a unit that's dated from the 60s, because that's when those ones were built. And they're just like, yeah, destroy the place, but we're still going to get our 1,800 bucks and do nothing, So it just depends on the person and the landlord and the tenants. So, yeah.
Which is also a note for tenants out there that not all landlords are created equally. And, it might be, even though it is a tough environment, to kind of know who you're dealing with on that side as well. Before we move on to what happens in a slower market, Aaron, I have just one more quick question on this front. If I am a mom and pop investor, at what point, or give me kind of your 2 cents on when do I get professional property management involved in my real estate portfolio? Now, if I'm a person like I don't want to deal with anything tenant related. Do I do that right away? Do I get some experience being a landlord and then make that decision? Give me your 2 cents on that.
So it depends on how you handle stress would be the best answer to that. So some people have a very low stress tolerance. They don't want to, like a door handle breaks and they're getting a call at 7 o'clock on a Wednesday night and they are stressed out because the door handle is broken and how are they going to fix this? It's after hours. It's going to be, $250 or something. And do I have to go there? Can I just call someone? What do I do? So if you're someone that gets stressed really easily about little stuff, you should hire a property manager from day one when you buy a property and just pass off the keys, pay the 10% or whatever the fees are. And, be happy that you set it, forget it. They're on call 24/7. You can call them 24/7 and it's good. That being said, it is nice if you're okay with handling a little bit of stress, you want to take on a bit of a challenge, the first couple properties you buy, it's great if you're able to manage it on your own. You save money, you save a couple $100 a month on property management. You really learn about, the small stuff that goes into property management, what tenants want, what tenants need, and also like kind of what should be fixed and what shouldn't be fixed. Because obviously the tenant wants everything fixed right away because they want the best place and they don't want the rent to increase. But also sometimes it's good to know like how to keep things realistic. So my kind of rule is, I have lots of investors, they buy a couple properties. Once they hit their third property, usually they're financially secure enough that they can afford a property manager. And also they're focused on their own businesses. They're focused on other stuff. Real estate is a secondary source of income. It's a secondary stream. So once they hit the third property, that's usually a good time to get your property manager involved.
Yeah, great answer. And I think even from my personal experience, if you focus on the fact that like, well, I really need to, earn my 25% on this rental property, I have a number in mind, but at the end of the day, it'll be $100 or $200 extra per month. If you just focus that energy somewhere else or focus on the thing that is really bringing in you much more money than that, maybe it makes more sense to hire a property manager. Now, if you're just like a 9 to 5 person and like your evening and weekends are always free, well, maybe it makes sense for that extra couple $100 to kind of manage it yourself. But I think just to add on to that, like keep in mind what actually brings in the most cash and the most value in your life and focus on that thing. And so if that is managing the property, focus on that. If it's, working your job or if it's sales or if it's something that creates a lot of value for you, then focus on that and maybe offload that portion of it. Is that something you'd agree with, Aaron?
That's very fair. Yeah, I would 100% agree with that.
All right, let's bring it home with the last one, Aaron. We're in a hot market right now, and there's really no signs that things are going to get better in Saskatoon as far as inventory. There's not as many houses being built as we need. Things are looking like things are just going to continue to be on a trajectory of tight housing for people who are trying to buy houses, and it's going to be continued tight housing for people who are looking for rent. But let's forward look and what happens in a slower market when it's a little tougher to fill these units. How does our strategy shift to handle a market like that?
Yeah, so that's again another reason. So it's interesting because there might be less money to be had, but that might be the time where you should spend a little more on a property manager, or at least, I also have programs where people can just hire me to help get the tenant in. Right? Some property managers will say, hey, I'm $500. I will help you get the tenant in, move them in, qualify them, and then you're on your own. Keys get handed off, and then you're on your own. So in those markets, it's really important to extra overqualify, do those important steps. Those 5 pillars are super, super important. Probably the work and income verification is even more important because there's less tenants and more properties on the market. So you want to make sure you're qualifying them. And another test I actually have, Ron, that I forgot to mention earlier. I have a kind of a sniff test, I call it. And it's when you go and you ask if you can look at the person's car. So most tenants in the world most tenants out there, the only thing they actually own, they don't own a house, they're renting your place because they need a place to stay, but they do own their own car. They have a vehicle payment, they have a responsibility, or they've got a car they own. if they don't take care of that vehicle, if you go, there's fast food wrappers everywhere. There's, dog hair and toy and the back seat's ripped up. Chances are if they're not taking care of their own property, they're not going to take care of your property. So that's another test that you can do. And as things slow down, just being extra careful and cautious. And, it might be worth it to leave the place vacant for another month to really get that quality tenant rather than rushing into, right now you can rent a place, you can put it up for market, you can get it rented in 2 days. In a slow market, don't do that. Take your time, because usually the person that'll rent it in 2 days is not the best tenant in the slow market.
That's probably the biggest thing that you hear from a lot of people who've been in the investment circle for a while, is that the biggest mistake they made was not being more patient with putting tenants in, and the wrong tenants are going to cause you all amounts of headache, just like your Frank and Bob story. And if you're trying to get this person out of the unit, and all of a sudden it becomes this massive headache for you, much better to have left it for one more. On this topic, Aaron, just before we wrap it up, anything to add on finding quality tenants and managing properties?
No, I think that's everything, Ron. The big thing is, I always recommend reach out to a professional property manager or a real estate professional, always get some advice, and go from there.
Okay, I know that was advice there, but do you have any other piece of advice for any real estate investors out there, or someone who's just starting to get into real estate right now? What would you tell them about buying a rental property?
I'd say now is a really good time because interest rates are up. Go out, get pre-qualified with guys like yourself, Ron. Start looking, because it is a good time. Prices, once interest rates drop, the duplexes and the really good, valuable properties out there are going to just increase in price. They are, the market's still stable. It's still, on the sales side of things are still up there. But I think once interest rates go down, there's a bit more flexibility. Then those duplexes that are 400,000 to 500,000 are going to go up to 600,000 to 700,000, and the tenant market won't be quite as hot. So my advice would be, if you're waiting to buy, don't wait. Go out and do it now, because now is really one of the best times to do it.
Wonderful. Aaron, give us a little bit of information on yourself. How can people get a hold of you? What are you specifically looking for right now in this moment?
Yeah, right now I'm helping lots of people with property management. I am actively taking on more people to increase my property management capacity. They can reach me at 306-716-8279 or email me at a.w.realestate@outlook.com. And I'd be happy to give anyone a free 1-hour consultation who's looking at getting into investing. Or if you're a seasoned investor and you just want to talk more, then I've got 8 years of experience and I own 12 properties myself. So always love to have a good chat.
Wonderful. You had a quote on your Facebook the other day saying, if you want something done, ask a busy person to do it. And as we were talking about before this conversation started, you are one of the busiest people in Saskatoon right now. So give Aaron a call if you have any questions on this front, and really appreciate you coming on and sharing these important details on the podcast, and looking forward to the next one.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Ron. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for checking out this episode of the Saskatchewan Real Estate Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it and found some value here. If you did, make sure to like that button to help the YouTube algorithm show this video to more people. And if you're looking for more content just like this, subscribe to never miss our weekly episodes that come out on Spotify and on YouTube. If you're looking for any mortgage broker services in the province of Saskatchewan, I'm a fully licensed mortgage broker and can help you on your next purchase, renewal, or refinance. Simply go to the show notes of this video for more details on how to get in touch with me. Until next week, I'm Ron Caroni, your Saskatchewan mortgage professional. Bye for now.